Now, the first space station China launched into orbit is no more. It's been crashing towards Earth for about 2 years and has finally re-entered the atmosphere above the South Pacific. It's thought most of the 10-metre-long Tiangong-1 module broke up on re-entry, although some fragments of the Space Lab could still be intact. Labour Dizeko has more.
Heavenly Palace blasting off. China's first space station was supposed to be a launchpad for bigger and better projects. But since then, the 8-ton spacecraft, around the size of a school bus, has stopped working and come crashing down to Earth. There was much speculation over where it might fall, with estimates including South America, Africa, the Middle East and Central Asia, to name just a few. In the end, the South Pacific is where it came down. Most of it is said to have burnt up on re-entry, with any debris falling into the vast waters below. All this is a far cry from the space station's glory years, when 2 different crews of astronauts visited. China says it's dealt with this situation according to international conventions, but it all seems pretty embarrassing for the country's space program. Labour Dizeko, BBC News.
Now, earlier I spoke to Dr. Jonathan McDowell, who's an astronomer at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Boston. And I asked him why it's so difficult to say when and where these things will happen.
Well, you know, it's not an easy problem. We did pretty well with when, but the trouble is that as this space station is flying at 26,000 kilometers an hour around the Earth, it's skimming the upper atmosphere. Now, when we have satellites that are way out in space, well above the atmosphere, no problem. I can tell you where they're going to be a week from now. But when they've got this headwind of the upper atmosphere that's blowing them around, and the density of that atmosphere is changing because the sun is burping and sending X-rays and things and heating the atmosphere, then you don't know from one day to the next how much wind this thing's going to be flying through, and so how fast its orbit's going to come down. That's really what it comes down to.
Fair enough. I have to say I had no idea that the sun burps, so it's a new one on me. Just how
well, we call them coronal mass ejections, but yeah.
Oh, there we go, there we go. How common is it that this sort of thing happens and that we get things sort of re-entering the Earth's atmosphere?
You know, satellites re-enter all the time. We've got a few small CubeSats coming down next week, a larger X-ray astronomy satellite in a few weeks. But Tiangong was 7.5 tons. That's pretty big. It's not the biggest ever. We've had things 100 tons come down. But yeah, about once a year we get something the size of Tiangong.
People must be worried about things, you know, of any size coming out from the atmosphere and hitting Earth. But the chances of them actually hitting a person and doing any damage are very small. Why is that?
Right. Well, first, the smaller things melt completely. So, especially if they're made of aluminium, which has a low melting point, then as they come in so fast through the atmosphere, they get heated up, they melt. Nothing gets down. For something like Tiangong, most of it would melt, but you get a few lumps that come down as fireballs. And even so, by the time they get to the surface, they're traveling at terminal velocity. They're slowed down by the air, so they don't do too much damage. And the other thing is that most of the Earth is empty. Even on the land, right? The fraction of the land that's taken up by people is actually pretty small. And most of the Earth is not land, it's ocean. As we discovered today, Tiangong-1 came down in the Pacific. That's, you know, the Pacific is the biggest single kind of thing on the planet. So it wasn't so surprising that it might end up there. So yeah, you know, it's playing the odds. We've had 50 satellites this big that have come down in the space age. And for each one, there's about a 1 in 10,000 chance that it could hit someone.
You just hope it's not going to be you, don't you? But can we expect this sort of thing to happen more frequently in the future as we see more satellites being used in space? You know, the chances then change, don't they? The proportions and the probabilities must change.
That's right. But I think there's been a change in how we do things so that back in the 60s and 70s, satellites this big and bigger were just designed to come and burn up at the end of their missions and no one cared. Since Skylab came down, people have started trying to bring them down under control. Tiangong was meant to do that, and they messed up. They didn't bring it down before it broke. And that'll happen now and again. But I think we'll see many fewer And we are seeing many fewer satellites of this sort of 8-ton kind of mass re-enter than we used to. The smaller ones, absolutely. There's a constellation of communication satellites called Iridium, that there are like 70-something of them, and they're all being brought down now at the end of their missions. But they're much smaller. They're only half a ton, and so almost nothing of them will reach the surface.